Happy December! We did it. We're at the end of the year. I don't know, it feels wild that it's already December. Like, it was just Thanksgiving. What the heck? I feel like Thanksgiving was 2 days after Halloween, and now we're in December. It's the holiday season. We're really in it, which is exciting, but also, again, wild. I am here to do my November wrap-up, which I'm really excited about because I read a lot of really good books in November. If you saw my October wrap-up, which I hope you did, I felt like I was a little off. I felt like it was kind of like an off reading month. I didn't read a whole bunch I was super into or loved, except for Carmen Maria Machado, which she's going to be a new favorite author. But yeah, let's get into November. Lots of good stuff. Okay, first off, the first thing I read in November is Every Heart a Doorway by Shannon McGuire. I read this on audio, and this was the first of I think 3 books that my mom and I listened to while we were driving across the country. So this book is about a home for kids who go through portals in this world. So it's set in our world right now, but you know, like in Narnia or Alice in Wonderland, those are all stories of kids going through a rabbit hole or through a wardrobe. But this book follows them when they come back to our world and are trying to adjust to being here, because obviously it's very different from what they are used to. So there's a home for them specifically set where they can adjust and get back to normal or kind of like deal with what happened. So this book follows our main character who just came back from one of the portal worlds. I did not write down her name, but you just gotta know she just came back. And so she's being introduced to this home and trying to figure out everything's going on. And while she's here, some murders start happening. So this ends up being a murder mystery. I feel like this book had a really, really interesting concept, and I really liked the characters. It had a pretty diverse cast of characters. Our main character is Ace, and we have a trans side character, so we have a lot going on there, which I think is really good. This book is super short. I'm sure it's a very popular book, so I'm sure you may know, but Every Heart a Doorway is like, well, it's like under 200 pages, right? Or it's just around 200. It's super, super short. And while that was good for a road trip and just trying to get through something, I don't know, I felt how short it was, and I do kind of wish it was longer, but I often wish books were longer. I don't usually go for really short books. I don't know if you've noticed, but I have some pretty long books on my shelves, and I tend to read longer books, except for this year when I've kind of shaken it up. I almost wish that it was not a murder mystery. I'm just not too sure. I don't know, I would have liked it if we just kind of like reveled in the characters more and talked about where they were and how they came back and how they're adjusting rather than it being a whodunit and trying to figure out like what's going on. This book, it was pretty okay. Not negative feelings, just kind of like, it was fine. I am, I think, interested in reading the other books in the series, especially considering that they're all pretty short. They're all kind of around a novella length, so it wouldn't be hard for me to go through those. So I definitely would consider picking them up. The next book we read on audio is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This book is a combination of a slave memoir, a fantasy, and a historical fiction. So this book follows Dana, who without warning and for no seeming reason gets thrust back to 1815, back in time to antebellum Maryland, where she is presented with this scene of a little boy drowning. So she goes and saves him, because when you see a little boy drowning, you're going to do something about it. And shortly after that, she is threatened with a gun because she is a black woman holding and helping a little white boy. So with her life being threatened, she snaps back to her present time again. And so this book follows as she goes and has these continuous episodes of going back in time, and they seem all to be connected with this little boy Rufus, or who then grows up in his own time, and she continuously has to save him, and she figures out that they are related. He is one of her ancestors. So as her life seems to be linked to this man, she keeps having to go back and be involved it feels really fresh, even though it was written in the 70s. It was really, really well written. This book is a lot about historical racism and violence, but it's also a character study. It looks at these characters in these situations, and it really digs into who they are and how they're feeling and why they're feeling. When Dana goes back to Maryland in this time, she is treated as a slave. People assume that's who she is when she is coming from being just a black woman in the 1970s. It's a culture shock. It's so vastly different than what she'd been experiencing. So within this lens and like within this context, Octavia Butler, like I said, just goes in on all these characters, and instead of just having it be a surface level, this is what happened, here's the plot, we're going back and forth, here's the violence that's happening, because there is violence that happens to these characters, it, humanizes them, and it talks about what they're feeling, and it's like a case study on these characters, and I thought that was really good and a needed addition to this story. Ultimately, I thought this was a really well-written book and very emotionally effective, and I would highly recommend if you're interested. I think it would be great. The next book we read is The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. This is a book that follows the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893. Yeah, 1893. We followed mostly two main characters. There are two people. It's Daniel H. Burnham, yeah, and who is an architect of the fair. We follow him as he's struggling to get the fair going and have it be this culturally defining thing. The World's Fair in Chicago was incredible, and we had people like Susan B. Anthony there and Thomas Edison. It's wild. So he was an architect of that, and so we follow him as he's trying to get the World's Fair to happen and also building it and everything, and as it's going on. And then we're also following H.H. Holmes, who is a serial killer. So we go back and forth. They're contemporaries of each other, so it's happening at the exact same time, but it's, again, following the World's Fair in Chicago, and at the same time how the serial killer is on the loose and just killing some people. This is actually a nonfiction book. It reads a lot like a fiction book. It's extremely thorough. Like, there's so much detail and substance there that is really, really interesting. Unlike just being like, this is what happened and this is why and here are all the facts. Like, the way that Erik Larson writes this book, it's like, you're there with them, and seeing things, smelling the smells, and going through this process. Kind of similar to In Cold Blood by Truman Capote, which is one of my favorite books. Definitely one of my favorite nonfiction books. Both of these really feel like fiction. They are nonfiction, but just the way that the narrative is told, or the way that it's told, there is a narrative, I guess I should say. So, yes. Similar vibe. Oh, also about murder. Interesting. I specifically got this book from Libby because I knew that we would be driving through Chicago, so we listened to this on our way to Chicago, through it, and while we were leaving. It's a fairly long audiobook. I will say, I don't know how much of it I absorbed. Is one of those things, I don't know if it was where we were driving, but I was not super paying attention so much to the book. So while I did enjoy it, I definitely do think that it deserves another reread, and I think I'll be interested in rereading it because there's a lot of stuff, a lot of details and nuances within it. But I really did enjoy listening to it while we were driving through Chicago. Okay, we are now done with my audiobook listens, and we can get into some physical books, which is my favorite. First one we have to talk about is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. But I picked this up, and I loved it. Oh, I loved it so much. Okay, so this book follows Linus, who is a caseworker, and he visits orphanages for magical children. He lives a pretty dull life. He goes to work. He does a very good job at work. He's extremely thorough. That's his work is his life. That's all he does. He goes to work and he goes home to his quite grumpy cat. And that's his everyday life. One day, he is requested to go to extremely upper management because they have a special case for him. So they tell him that they want him to go to a very special home, to a very special orphanage. This orphanage is different. It has seemingly unusual magical children, possibly dangerous. So essentially he has to go and make sure that everything's on the up and up. His whole job is to make sure that the orphanages are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Like I said, the children in this orphanage seem to be extra powerful and dangerous. There is even the Antichrist there. So this book just follows Linus as he goes and checks on this orphanage and meets all the children that live there and meets Arthur, the master of the orphanage, and it's just he learns that not everything is as it seems. This book is so good. It's like a warm hug. It's instant serotonin. It's so cozy and comforting. It almost has like a Lemony Snicket vibe to it, which may sound odd because I was just saying it's cozy and comforting, and Lemony Snicket and the series of unfortunate events, like that's a series of unfortunate events. But the way that everything is like extra, like there's like you got a knob and you like you know turned up the saturation and like almost like a Wes Anderson movie, if you know those. It's like everything's just more. That's my absolute favorite thing. That's my favorite vibe. It's my favorite vibe in shows and movies and in books. I love it so much. It's very whimsical and enchanting. And then the city where he lives is so dull and gray and constantly raining, but then he goes to the ocean for the first time and it's vibrant and colorful, and it's just so the vibe of this book is impeccable. The book itself, the story, it's about family and what it means to be a family and what family means. And it's about how complex characters are and how complex people are. You know, it's not black and white. Like there's always nuance, and you know, like everything's not as it seems. Like on the tin, like you can have an idea this is what it's gonna be, but then you get there and you meet these people and it's different. I cried multiple times while reading this book. I want to reread it now. It's so good. I loved it. It's clearly a 5 out of 5 stars. Clearly going to be one of my favorite books I've read this year. It's amazing. Highly recommend. I feel like everyone should read this. It has everything you could ever want, and it's queer and wonderful, and I love it. Okay, the next book I read is Disfigured, on Fairy Tales, Disability, and Making Space by Amanda LeDuc. This is what it says. This is all about disability and disfigurement in fairy tales, folklore, and like Disney stories, and how there is a deep history of as far back as, and you can't see, but pretend that I'm pointing to as far back as Aesop's Fables and Grimm's fairy tales. This book explores disability and disfigurement in those stories, and how the existence and how disability exists in those stories, how that then influences us, like while we were reading it in children, how then that, you know, influences us as adults, like having that background, what that means for how we like perceive the world from now on, or from then on. This book discusses how often in these stories disfigured or disabled people are often the villains, or if they're not, their whole storyline is that they need to overcome and get rid of their disfigurement or disability in some way. You know, it's the idea that every Bond villain is disfigured, has a scar, has something going on. Scar from The Lion King, his defining feature is that he has a scar. So these connections, while over on the page, like enters our subconscious and make it so we have this connection between disability and villainy. And also discusses how children, like a disabled child reading these stories, hearing these stories, watching these movies, while instead of being able to look at the protagonist, the princess, whoever, the hero, and being able to be like, oh, I want to be that, like they can only help but to see themselves as the villain, because that's who they look like. That's the representation they're being given, and how negative that is, and how negatively impactful that is. I thought this was really good. I think it's really important to know about what this author's talking about and to be able to recognize, you know, like I didn't so much realize this connection, and so now I'm able to see it and kind of start to, you know, work against what has been ingrained in my mind for so long now. Also, the cover is gorgeous. I love it. I'm obsessed with the cover. Okay, the next book I read is Fire by Kristen Cashore. This is a companion or sequel or prequel to Graceling. So these are tied together. I read both of these in middle school and I was obsessed with them, specifically Graceling. I have very, very fond memories of reading Graceling. I just thought it was the best thing in the world. So I bought these a few years ago as kind of nostalgia buys, and I wanted to reread them. So I ended up reading Graceling, or reread Graceling a year or two ago, and so I just picked up Fire in November. So this book follows Fire. She's our main character, and Fire is a monster. So in this world, there are monstrous creatures. There's animals that are monsters and some humans. And the ways that you can identify a monster is by their overwhelming beauty. They're gorgeous. It's all absorbing. You're obsessed with them when you see them. Human monsters have the ability to read minds and kind of control people's minds. So this is following Fire, the monster. So it follows her as in this kingdom, there's a lot of political threats happening, and some people want the throne, some people don't, and a threat of war, and Fire gets pulled into it when there are a string of attempted assassinations, and the throne sees her as a very valuable tool to be able to read the minds of certain prisoners and people they've captured, and spies from the other kingdoms they're trying to get the throne. It's fun. It's really fun. It's for such a chunky book. I read it very fast because I feel like you just have to. It's a very, very quick read. I don't know if it's spectacular. I don't know if it's amazing. I will say, I'm not that interested in reading about a main character whose only struggle is that she's very beautiful. It's a continuous conversation about how she doesn't want to be that pretty. She doesn't want all the attention, which, I know is, a thing, but also, I don't know. I didn't get much out. I was like, okay, I'm not so much enjoying this storyline in particular, that plot point. But, it has everything you want. It has kind of, a love triangle a bit. There is, a romance, which I definitely loved a whole bunch when I read it, and I still liked. It was fine. We have, Fire, and then we have the brooding commander of the king's army, and is that a spoiler? No. From the first page that, they're gonna be. On the back, it says, this kills me. So, we have, a chunk about talking about, the political intrigue in the kingdom, and it says, "This is where Fire lives, a girl whose startling appearance is impossibly irresistible, and who can control the minds of everyone around her. Everyone except Prince Bergen." Of course, she can't read the minds of him, which is not even true. There's other people that she's whatever. It's very enjoyable. I think what I'm trying to say is, pick it up if it's interesting to you. Just, don't think it's gonna be the best thing ever. Okay, something that I do want to say, I think I've talked about this in a video before, but I love when specifically the love interests can communicate in their minds. They don't have to speak out loud, they can just think things at each other. I love it. I will forever always love it, and it absolutely is because of this and Graceling. Both Graceling and Fire have this as a plot point, and it's great, and I still love it in this book. It's still good in that one, that's for sure. Okay, the next book I read is A Lots Away by Darcy Little Badger. Before I talk to you about this book, I just want to talk about the cover of this book, the spine of this book, and the hardback of this book. Look at that. Look at that. Look at it. It's so good. This book is gorgeous, and I feel like it really is a good representation of what's inside of the book, because wow, did I love this a lot. So this follows our main character, A Lots Away. So A Lots Away lives in a world that is extremely similar to our own. There's ice cream, there's school, there's all the normal things, there's phones, but magic exists in this world. So it's a world where magic exists and all the legends you've heard are real. which just, I loved the characters and the writing. I loved the writing, but the world that Darcy Littlebadger created is so thorough and so interesting, and I just want to live in it. Alotsowe has the ability to raise ghosts of dead animals, so that means we have a ghost dog companion, which is spectacular and amazing. I loved that. So good. This story starts when Darcy's cousin is murdered, and she has a dream, and he shows up in her dream and tells her that it was a murder, and asks her to protect his family. So she goes on an adventure to figure out the mystery of the murder, who killed him, and to protect her family. I loved how this book weaved the mystery of what happened with her cousin and this like urban story with legends of Alotsowe's great-grandmother, Great Six. So every once in a while we would have a legend, a story from that time, and how, the stories are connected, and the things that Alotsowe could learn from hearing these stories of her Great Six. I thought that was so good. I loved those parts. I just loved this a lot. This book was great. It was so good. Yeah, this is Darcy Littlebadger's debut novel. So I'm so excited. Anything that Darcy Littlebadger writes from now on, I'll pick up for sure. I enjoyed this so much. And of course, I feel like it's worth it to point out that Darcy Littlebadger herself is Lipan Apache, as is her main character, so its own voices. I loved this. This was so good. Really great. And it's also gorgeous. Like I said, it's so gorgeous. And so I love it on my shelves. I really want more books in this world. I think that would be great. I loved the characters. Our main character is Ace. She says it. I think that's amazing. I loved this book. The next book I read is SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome by Mary Beard. And this is a history of ancient Rome. What a concept. Who knew? I love nonfiction books that tell you exactly what they are on the title. But this is, I'm going to say it again. I'm stopping myself from saying in History of Ancient Rome. I just said that. This is a book about ancient Rome. Stop it, Keely. So this book goes through the history of the very beginnings of Rome and what we know from that, through the Republic and the great emperors. And it ends in around the year 200 of current time. So this spans about 1,000 years. I thought this was really interesting. This was very readable. It was more, I don't know if I would say it was very readable. This was more readable than I had anticipated it being. And as someone who knew nothing about ancient Rome, really nothing at all, so this was like a very all-encompassing book, and I got a lot out of it. I really enjoyed reading it. Like I said, I was pleasantly surprised by how readable it was for me. I felt like I could get through it fairly easily. It didn't seem too difficult, and I'll be honest with you, I picked it up because it's written by a woman, which is not always easy to find with these kinds of books. So I was like, yeah, I'll read that, I'll pick it up. And I've had it on my shelf for a while. This is one of the ones I was like happy to have read because I've been wanting to read it for quite a few years. I guess I'll say if you're interested in ancient Rome, I'd recommend it. The next book I read is Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. So this book follows Ifemelu and Obinze, who are in a relationship at the beginning of this. They're in high school and the beginning of college years. They live in Nigeria. While they're starting college, there is lots of protests and strikes of the professors. During this time, Nigeria is under a military dictatorship. So they decide to leave and go to college in America. But it doesn't quite work out for both of them. So this follows as Ifemelu goes to America and starts to study college, but Obinze is not able to do that because after 9/11, immigration to America was very difficult, so he wasn't able to get in, so he ends up going to England. So we follow as they are separated and they aren't able to do exactly what they wanted to do. This book really heavily talks about and discusses Ifemelu's time in America and, being not just Black in America, but being African and how that changes things. Ifemelu was discovering what it means to be Black and experiencing racism for the first time, which didn't happen before. So it's another book kind of like discussing race in America, but from like a very different lens. And I thought that was really, really interesting, and a really important addition to what I've known and heard about before and read about before. Like, this other perspective is super needed and relevant. So it follows her and her struggles in America, follows a bit of Obinze, and then it's when they meet again in Nigeria 15 years later. So it's just the story of these characters and their lives and what's going on. It's a very character-driven book. I thought this was great. The writing obviously was really good. I'll continue to pick up things by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This one is The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman. Shout out to Chelsea, who lent me this book in high school. Chelsea, let me know if you want this back. So sorry I kept it for so long, but I just read it and I loved it. So sorry. Okay, so this is The Golden Compass. I feel like this is a very well-known, loved, well-read book. It is a children's book, middle grade. It follows Lyra, who grew up first of all, she lives in a world in which everyone has an animal companion for the rest of their lives, which I think is the best thing. They're called demons? Something like that. But I think that's delightful. That's my favorite part. I love that so much. And they can like communicate with their, I'm going to call them animal companions, sorry. But they can communicate with their animal companions and talk to them. And when they're kids, their companions like change forms all the time. So she has one that is a moth sometimes, who's a mink other times, who can be like a cat. It's great. But so we're in this world where that exists. She grew up at a college. Yeah, at a college. And kind of just like got to run around. Her parents weren't there. Her parents had died, actually, so she just got to run around and do whatever she wanted, much to a lot of the scholars' chagrin. This book follows as she is introduced to this thing called dust, and is going in, and it's like this mysterious thing. And after she starts hearing about that, there are the gobblers, which are people that steal children. So those start happening a lot. And we just follow her as she ends up going on this adventure to try to stop the gobblers, and is kind of whisked away herself, and, you know, ends up having to save the world. This is very much a first book in a series. A lot of things were built up, we were introduced to the world and kind of just like getting to know everything, and, you know, the next books will start to really get into what's gonna happen next. But I really loved this. I thought this was great. I read this was so quick to read. I did also read it on audio. I saw that the audio on Libby was a full cast of narrators, which is my favorite thing in the world. So that was so good. It was like I felt like I was watching a movie. It was so fun and exciting, and I really, really want to watch the HBO show on this now. If any other friends want to just donate me the second book in the series, because I've seemed to have just taken Chelsea's, let me know. That'd be great. Okay, that's it. That's all of the books I read in November. I hope you enjoyed me talking through all of those books, even though it's very long. I had a great reading month this month. I hope you had a good November. I hope you're having a good beginning of December. I'm hoping that if you are someone who gets in the holidays like spirit and likes that stuff, that you're getting in there and you're having it. I've certainly been listening to a lot of Christmas music. It's been great. But if that's not your deal, I hope that you're just having a great December anyway, and revel in the fact that 2020 is almost done. That's great. I hope you have a great day. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye. I really just have Taylor Swift lyrics stuck in my head now. Spotify Wrapped came out. This is not what I'm supposed to be talking about, but I'm very excited. I don't know. Spotify Wrapped season is my favorite. I can make like a 15-minute video just talking through my Spotify Wrapped and talking about who I listen to and why I think people are where they are and why I thought I'd listen to certain things more. But that's not what this is. This is a November wrap-up. Okay, that's it. We're done. Now I get to put all these books back on my shelves. Yay.